Değerli konuklarımız, merhaba. Çağdaş Eğitim Vakfı olarak bu yıl 7. kez, çevrim içi olarak ise ilk kez düzenlediğimiz İzmir Çocuk ve Gençlik Edebiyatı günlerinin 3. canlı yayın oturumuna hoş geldiniz. Sizlere Çağdaş Eğitim Vakfı ve ÇOGED Düzenleme Kurulumuz adına sevgiyle selamlıyorum. Bugün yine çok değerli bir konuğumuzla birlikteyiz. Astrid Lindgren Memorial Award Alman'ın direktörü sevgili Suzi Erşahin bugün bizimle birlikte. Suzi Hanım, hoş geldiniz.
Merhaba, iyi akşamlar. Ne kadar mutluyum burada olmaktan. Uluslararası Çocuk ve Gençlik Ödülleri'nin direktörüyüm. İngilizcesi Şule Hanım'ın söylediği gibi Astrid Lindgren Memorial Award, kısaltması ALMA olarak geçiyor. Maalesef Türkçe konuşmadığım için kusura bakmayın. Benim Türkçem o kadar fena değil konuştuğum zaman. Ama sunum yapmak kadar da iyi olmayabilir. O nedenle sunumumu İngilizce yapacağım. Fakat öncelikle EÇEV'e, Şule Hanım'a ve bugünkü etkinlik için beni davet eden, emek veren herkese çok teşekkür etmek istiyorum. Çok teşekkür ederim. Bir yanımızda tercüman Gamze Hanım da var. O da tercümanlık çok önemli ve zor bir iş. Size de çok teşekkür ediyorum. Ve Çocuk ve Gençlik Edebiyat Günleri için yaşasın. Teşekkürler.
Çok teşekkür ederiz bu güzel ve sıcak girişiniz için. Değerli konuklarımız, daha önce de duyurduğumuz gibi bugünkü söyleşimizi İngilizce gerçekleştireceğiz. Söyleşi simultane çeviriden takip etmek isteyen izleyicilerimizin ekranlarının sağ alt köşesindeki Interpretation butonunu tıklayarak Türkçe kanalını seçmeleri gerekiyor. Suzi Hanım'ın söylediği gibi kendisi ekranda değil ama çeviri masasında bugün bizimle Gamze Er beraber. Sevgili Gamze'ye de hoş geldin diyorum. Şimdi dilerseniz dil seçimimizi yapıp söyleşimize başlayalım.
I'm very happy to be speaking to a Turkish audience again. Of course, I'm sad that we can't do this for real, that I could see all your faces and hear all your voices, and you could see and hear mine. I hope, just like the rest of the world, that the blanket of COVID that seems to be covering everything at the moment will soon be lifted. But if we have learned something from this pandemic time, it's that in an online way, the world is perhaps a little bit smaller. Here we are more together. That through things like Zoom, we can still connect and we can share. So my ambition is to give a short talk about my work as the director of the world's largest award for children's literature, and hopefully give some insights and reflections on the critical role of children's literature, not only from a Swedish perspective, but also with an international outlook.
Thank you. Let us start with ALMA then. It is the most prestigious award in the field of children's and young adult literature. How did ALMA start? To whom, how, and why are the awards given? We know this year's winners announced very recently. Who is this year's laureate? Why was he awarded? Please.
Well, when the well-known Swedish writer Astrid Lindgren passed away in 2002, at the age of 94, the Swedish government created this award, the Astrid Lindgren Memorial Award, to promote every child's right to great stories. I'm sure that most of you know who Astrid Lindgren is. She's the author of 34 books, chapter books, 41 picture books, and they have sold about 165 million copies, and they have been translated to more than 107 languages. And from a Swedish perspective, every child growing up in Sweden knows who Astrid Lindgren is and her books. They are kind of part of our DNA, They are in our system. We all grew up reading her and watching her films. But it's not just her popularity and brilliance as a writer that gave rise to the Alma Award. Throughout her long life, Astrid Lindgren was an advocate and also a spokesperson and a tireless fighter for children's rights. First and foremost, she was a humanist, a real humanist. She always spoke with moral conviction, with humor, and always with the focus on children's fundamental rights as world's citizens. She was an outspoken voice also in the public debate in Sweden, demanding gender equality and an end to corporal punishment, promoting children's voices and insisting on the importance of access to culture for children. And the central message in her books is that children have the right to be treated with respect and also with love, that adults have the obligation to look after these fundamental needs, to provide food for the children, for them, to give them a secure home, a safe place to live and study, but also perhaps most critically, to really listen to what they as children have to say. I will read a quote from her, which is very typical from her, and it goes something like this. Give children love, and even more love, and then common sense will follow. So with this in mind, the award was created not just to honor Astrid Lindgren, as I said, but to promote every child's rights to great stories. The Alma Award is a global award which is given annually to a person or to an organization or to an illustrator who has an outstanding contribution to children's and young adult literature. And with the prize of 5 million Swedish crowns, it's quite a lot of money, it's the largest award of its kind. They sometimes call it the Little Nobel Prize. Above all else, it highlights the importance of reading today and for future generations. It's awarded to those who continue to work in the spirit of Astrid Lindgren, which one would say with imagination, bravery, respect, empathy, and maintaining the highest degree of artistic excellence. Okay, so how is the laureate selected? There is an independent jury consisting of 12 members who are Swedish academicians, writers, illustrators, librarians, and children's rights specialists. And there's also always a member from the Astrid Lindgren family. So right now there's a great-grandchild of the family in the jury. And these specialists, this jury, who over a year read through about 250 nominations that have been made by nomination organizations around the world. So the next question is, who can nominate? Those who can nominate include, for example, reading promotion organization, university departments, who has a focus on children and young adult literature, libraries, writers' organization, basically people who have great knowledge of children and young adult literature. We don't accept any nomination by private individuals or publishers or commercial entities. So the jury goes through any organization that wants to apply, and we also welcome new applicants. The nomination organization can propose 2 candidates from their own country and 2 candidates who are international. And they are kind of the cornerstone of what we do. And I do want to take this opportunity to reach out to all of you here if there is anyone in here who represents an organization with this focus on children and young adult literature that would like to become a nomination organization, you can contact me directly, or you can contact through the ALMA website. And then the jury is the one that decide if it's an okay nomination organization. So how does the jury make their decision then? Of course, the jury's guiding principle is to choose a writer, an illustrator, or a reading promotion organization that works in the spirit of Astrid Lindgren's legacy. What is also important is that the jury focuses on the whole body of work, not just one book or one event or one activity, but a whole body of work. And what I can tell you is that it's an incredibly difficult job that the jury has. We receive names of hundreds of outstanding, really outstanding figures every year, and it takes our jury about 9 months to intensely go through this, read, study, and then finally make their decision. This year's laureate was announced just very recently on the 30th of March. And his name is Jean-Claude Mourleva, a French writer. And he has been working since 1997, and he's been published numerous books focusing on young readers and young adult readers particularly. And his work has been translated into over 20 languages. And some of his books include Jefferson. It's a more recent book from 2018 that tells the story of a hedgehog who loves to read. Another one is Sophie Scholl, Non à la Cité from 2013, which is a book about the German student activist who resisted the Nazi regime and was captured and executed by the guillotine at the age of 22. I also saw that one of his books is translated into Turkish, Tersine Akan Nehir, it's called. And one thing I would like to point out is that Jean-Claude Mourleva, he's been nominated many times. He's been part of the jury work for 10 years. So that's quite a long time. So far, there have been 3 reading promotion organizations who have been awarded. And to decide on these nominations, it's a particular work. The jury travels to the countries to meet the organizations and tries to get a grip on how they work. Of course, they don't travel to see all the organizations. They select a few whose work they find interesting, and then they travel and do their research. To give the award to such organizations, it's important for ALMA, as it's a way to demonstrate our commitment to reading promotion and the significance that it plays in reaffirming children's fundamental rights. So whatever happens in the future, as we move to a more online experience, reading, as far as we can tell, remains a critical part of how we communicate. Literacy is still a prerequisite for the advancement of every child, but it's also the doorway to discover new worlds, to break down barriers and expand imagination.
Well, Suzi Hanım, now let me ask a question at this point. As ALMA, do you see any trends in the world during 2021? Has the pandemic had an effect, for example, on the work around the world?
Well, in terms of the pandemic, I would say the jury has not seen any results, not yet, it's too early. I think maybe after a bit more time, we can see some contributions being added to the jury. Because basically it takes time to write a book, and it takes time to get the nominations to the jury. So the jury has not seen any results of this. But reports from Sweden are that publishers, I don't know how it is in Turkey, but the publishers in Sweden have received a record number of manuscripts during 2020, which may be a signal that people have had more time on their hands to write while they have been at home. But what I would like to say, which is important, is that the jury takes a much broader view and isn't really focused on short-lived trends, but rather they look for things that have a lasting and sustainable value. But in terms of the office, we had to change our work during the pandemic. We had to change our annual award ceremonies, our announcements and public events, just like many others. But one specific project was a collaboration with an international center for contemporary art that I initiated. It was with this art center called Tensta Konsthall. We initiated a project with the title Young Writers for Young Readers, where we invited an open call to children between the ages 10 to 18 to reflect on their year living with the pandemic. And about 250 young people have contributed with their writing. And actually, we're just going to announce the winner in the next few days. It's been great to read the stories from their perspective on everything that has been going on in their life, being away from school and living with lockdown. Another project we initiated was a collaboration with a circus high school. Yes, there is really a circus high school in Stockholm. It is run by a really well-known, international known circus called Cirkus Cirkör. They chose an Alma laureate author, and by reading the book and also working with a design high school, they will do a public performance. The students of the circus will do circus, and the design students will do their costumes. And I'm hoping with this that we will create a whole day event, a public event on the street in a public place, if COVID permits, where we will also invite young readers and put all focus on reading. And the aim of the project is to show how literature can work as the inspiration to create something new, really, that great books can move beyond the printed page into other creative areas and art forms.
Well, I would have another question right here. Do you see big differences in approaches in different regions and countries?
Well, if we see many differences, the first thing I would say is I follow the work of the jury. I see there are more similarities in subjects and the ways of storytelling than differences. And I don't think there's a surprise in that. Of course, there are cultural differences, but I think from a young reader's perspective, many of the things they are worried about or that they are passionate about are the same or at least very similar. And in the world of children's book, where fantasy plays such a key role, specific cultural differences are sort of superseded by, say, magic and make-believe, new worlds, new beings, and really new everything. So I would argue that children's books are grounded in real life and common shared experiences of children anywhere in the world, and in the possibility of escaping into a new universe where cultural differences actually are erased. And of course, there are some differences you can see. There obviously would be differences. Like humor is one, or what is seen as a taboo in one culture. But I would more emphasize the things that they have in common. But maybe it's a little bit more apparent in illustration. There you can see the differences maybe a little bit more. Even in a global world of digital expansion, visual language seems to be more maybe regionally specific. And I really don't want to make any kind of foolish generalizations. But in everything from color and formal composition to characterization and style, you can see some differences. At least I imagine so. In Sweden, it seems illustration in Sweden right now, there seems to be an illustration trend of something that is rather painterly, almost like mannerism. Whereas in Turkey, what I have seen often seems maybe more direct, instructive, where the images are maybe supporting the text rather than defining the storytelling.
Well, then I think there's another appropriate question here. So can we suggest that the books can help to talk about issues that adults sometimes feel uncomfortable to talk with children?
I believe so. But we also have to look at the local and regional issues. For example, children growing up in a war zone or in a refugee camp, or discovering their sexual identity in a country where some forms of, for example, sexual identity are restricted or denied, means that they are looking for different things from the books that they read. And this, of course, has also an effect on authors and illustrators who both consciously and also unconsciously turn these concerns into books. But it's equally a question of time. Like one of our laureates, Wolf Elbruch, who famously illustrated the book, The Story of the Little Mole Who Knew It Was None of His Business. You are probably familiar with this book. But if you haven't read it, it's the incredibly innocent story about a mole who goes in search of which animal who had left an excrement, a piece of poo on their head. Now, such a story would maybe, perhaps, have been unimaginable when I was a child, and I certainly would be in some cultures today, that it could be seen as offensive today in certain cultures. But, other subject matters that might have been taboo for previous generations or today in different cultures could include sex, death, divorce, sexuality, climate change, menstruation, racism, disability, or functional variation. What I would say is that the speed of change between generations is increasing, so that I can see, for example, in my own children who are now grown-ups, that there is a difference with the eldest and my youngest son. The youngest grew up with attitudes to sexuality and, for example, non-binary identity that are different and much more open. So a child growing up in Sweden today has a little problem in accessing children's books that directly deal with issues of then, for example, non-binary sexual identity or chronic disease, suicide, divorce, depression, or climate change. And I think as much as children's literature can talk about things that are taboo, it's also a forum to talk about things that children are interested in right now, that concerns to them. So we have seen more books about refugees, racism, breaking norms, climate, etc., etc. In Sweden, it's a great place in a way. There's a Swedish Institute for Children's Books who publishes statistics about subject matters of books and how many books that are printed, and if everything about literature, basically. They collect data. And in their most recent study, they show the increase in books talking about climate change and norms and normativity. And they released a new report yesterday. And eventually there will be, the same report will be in English, but I think it will take a few months before it's translated. But the report yesterday showed that in 2020, there were fewer books printed and fewer translations of books from other countries than ever before. Meaning translations from Turkish books, for example, less of them, translations going down. And several books in 2020 in Sweden was connected to the pandemic. So yes, there you could see a trend, basically. It didn't reach the jury, but in Sweden you can see this trend. And what their recent report also point out is the worrying decrease, like I said, in number of publications in Swedish or works in translation. And potential factors behind the decrease include changes to publishing strategies made by individual publishing houses, debates in recent years about the supposed overpublishing of children's and young adult books, and also the increase maybe in the digital publishing. Of course, it's deeply, deeply worrying if we move towards only reading books produced from one country, from your own country, to hear one set of voices. We are living in a globally connected world where translation has never been easier. So surely we should be able to address these issues. And I must say that translation is one of the most important issues for Alma. As with translation, we encouraging a greater global access to culture for all. So this point is important. Well, this brings me to my final thoughts on the international perspective. I would say that the greatest regional differences are about national cultural significance that is given to children and young adult literature in any given country. I think what allows children's literature to flourish and to take on a greater cultural significance is the support of all aspects in the civil society. In Sweden, there are many organizations who are focusing on children's literature. I count up a few, like the Swedish Institute for Children's Book, the Swedish Academy for Children's Book, the National Reading Ambassadors run by the Swedish State Council, Alma, the Ministry of Storytelling, the National Children and Young People's Theatre, Unga Klara, Litteraturlund, which is a yearly or biannual festival focusing only on children's literature, and many, many other organizations. And what I would argue is that the greater institutional and also governmental and educational importance that is given to children's literature, the higher status it has and will have, the importance given to children's books in newspapers, in social media, on TV, all these are what creates the conditions by which children's literature can support children's rights, and not least their rights of access to culture. And of course, the writers, illustrators, and readers are always there and creating. But what is sadly often lacking in many societies are the social and political support that places children's literature on equal term as other forms of culture. As I said before, literature is essential for forcing us to address difficult and challenging topics for future generations. Children ask hard questions and they demand answers. They are the future. So if we ask a global question, is there any subject you cannot talk about to a child? If your answer is yes, then maybe you need to consider why. I think you can talk to children about everything. They will understand it on their terms. Children should never be kept in the dark about things that we adults see as really difficult to explain to them. We should explain to them. Or to put it in another kind of way, we are not born with discrimination or intolerance. We are just basically taught it. So I guess the Nordic countries can be seen as being very liberal. And certainly there are the social pressures that have meant that children's rights are prioritized. I'm happy to say that Sweden was one of the first nations to ratify the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. And as of this past January in 2020, 1st of January 2020, Sweden has incorporated the convention into Swedish law. I think this is an important step because enshrined in these laws, amongst other things, are children's fundamental cultural rights, access to education, and also access to culture itself, free of censorship and the rights of their own freedom of expression. But beyond governmental policy, one also has to look at the civil society, like you. And of course, there are many fantastic initiatives around the world. Things like book gifting initiatives that exist all around the world, I'm sure, make truly a big difference. To give a Turkish example, I met Dilber Koç from the library in Misiköy'ü outside of Bursa in Nilüfer Belediyesi. And she told me about their initiative of giving all the mothers a book in order to create a library at home. And then after some weeks, invite the author to talk about the book. And some women had read it and some women had not read it. But it's a beautiful initiative to help turn a home environment into a place for literature and to make the world of literature real, actual real, when you get to meet the author face to face. And I think it doesn't just open up the idea of being a writer as a profession or an illustrator as a profession, but actually that storytelling and books are super important, and that reading actually really, really means something. So I've come to an end. I hope I didn't speak too quickly or too slow. And I want to end with a quote from Astrid Lindgren's character, Pippi Longstocking. You probably all know Pippi with the red hair. And that shows that whatever challenges we may have, including even this awful pandemic, can be tackled if you begin from the right place. So Pippi says, I have never tried that before, so I think I should definitely be able to do that. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. It was a very illuminating speech. And we have a question from the audience. What is the institute that researches about children's book trends?
I can, it's called the Swedish, what's it called in English? The Swedish Institute of Books. It's not called that. It is called, here I have it, the Swedish Institute for Children's Books. And if you go into their website, you can look at their analysis they did in previous years, where you can read statistics and what kind of topics that writers write about and what has been popular in that year or that year.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would like to remind our audience that you can also put some questions at the Q&A section at the bottom, and I will be pleased to convey them to our guests. And here's another question for you. How do you define quality in children's literature then? In your opinion, which merits should the quality literature hold?
Yeah, it's not an easy question. What is the quality of children's literature, is it? It's a tricky word. I think, of course, it's really tricky to compare an illustrator, for example, who have worked for 40 years with a young writer who's maybe writing with a lot of slang. It's not easy. If I look at my work for the award, my job is to make sure that on the jury we have great people who have great knowledge within this field and a diverse knowledge, so that they can research and look at works with a diverse look, basically. I think that's a really important factor for me, to ensure that they reflect a diversity, so that they can see what different expressions could mean and how that work. But I think we know there is not just like one answer to this very quick question. I think for my personal self, I believe a good quality book is something that challenges your mind, take your imagination somewhere, is books that you learn something from, that with pictures and illustrations that make you curious, and a book that takes you to explore thoughts and fantasy, and also questions your life, that you can go to a book and find sources of information in there. Not sure if that gave you a straight answer, but like I said, I don't think there is one answer.
Yes, it does. It enlightens us quite a lot. And I would like to ask you if you would have any suggestions as to how could children's literature be used more effectively in schools?
Also, I will reflect back to, again, to the Astrid Lindgren Memorial Award. What we do when we have a laureate, we make a guidebook. And it's free to download on our website, and it's connected then to a book. It's a guidance book for a teacher or for a parent or an adult or even for a child, with lots of questions and queries, so that you can dive into the books and go into the depth. I think basically what advice can you give? I think there are so many more specialists on this very topic, so many pedagogues that are better than I am in this. But I think what I can see with my own children and what I truly believe in is that you have to have passionate teachers who also have time, because they're always very busy. But I think passionate teachers who are like good role models, and also who can find the right book for the right age. I think children really, and young people, they get bored if they get, a too complicated book maybe, or a too easy book, or a subject that is not anything that they are interested in. So I think you have to find the right kind of subject that is adequate for that age group. Then I also believe that in the society, we really have to have good role models. We have to have football players who are, reading, or actors that are reading, or people on television who are promoting this. I mean, we have to post this in the world. And with this also, I think, like I mentioned before, to hire the status of children's literature, but also children's culture. I think it's a job we all have to push. And you are doing it by doing this wonderful event.
Well, thank you very much. Here's another question from our audience. They ask, could writers be very different from the average of the society they are born and grown in? Parallel to that, do the writers from lesser developed countries have a strong chance to succeed in such high quality international competitions?
I think, first of all, I have to say, it's not the competition. That is an important thing that you have to remember. What happens is that you have these nomination organizations that nominate. Of course, infrastructures in different societies, in different countries, look different. Of course, in countries like Sweden, or say France, or I would say also in Turkey, I mean, where you have a good infrastructure, at least of, there are publishers, you sell books, there's a market of books. There's a venue for artists, for writers and illustrators to exist and to show their books. That's one thing. And if you take those, if you have that, in some ways, that writer or illustrator will be reached to the Astrid Lindgren Memorial Award in some ways. If they're good enough, if they're chance, if they're publishing, if they are working hard, yes, there's no border of who can be nominated to be, or who can get the award, who will be awarded. There is no, the jury does not look at nationality or country. They actually look at the work itself. Did I answer the questions there? I'm not sure.
Well, I think you did, in my opinion.
Okay.
And here's another one. Do you think the level of the quality in children's literature in Sweden is related to the level of social democracy in Sweden?
I think, of course, politics, social culture, a wealth of a country is interlinked. And I think subjects that authors and writers write about is linked in some ways to your culture. But there's also other dimensions that are similar that I also talked about, the dimensions of imagination, and I think all children are worried about certain things or interested in certain things. I think if you look at football, for example, it's such a common, great sport that exists everywhere. Social democracy, absolutely. It has influenced the Swedish society. There's no doubt about it. Absolutely. In so many ways. Absolutely.
There's another question. One of our audience says that they have a child who believes that they should be, as a child, in the selection board. The output should be valued from a child's perspective rather than the adults. What's your opinion on this?
Good question. I think the way I'm trying to work right now with the collaborations that I'm doing, trying to give voice actually to children is very important. I think we have to create spaces for that, where the children's voices can be heard, like the competition, the writing competition, which was between the age of 10 and 18. We have to give them those places. I don't know if they would be able to be on the board of Alma to read and give so much time and read complex works in many ways, but it's not a bad idea, and I will forward that to the jury and see what they will reply. But I think it's a very important question. The perspective of the child. Where is the voice of the child? How? And that's also when you write books. Where is the child? I mean, who is the reader, and what perspective are you writing from?
Mm-hmm. Another question is this: what would a child who does not meet enough picture books be missing emotionally, aesthetically, or in other areas when he or she is a grown-up?
I mean, there's beauty outside of picture books, of course, but with pictures, we can learn a lot. And with the curious mind of the authors and illustrators who can look at the details in works, of course, we are served a great, it's like a treasure box to be able to have that. But we're moving to a world where images are more and more present in the computers. I mean, it can be moving images, it can be books, it's films, it's YouTube. I mean, we are bombarded with images. So of course, I mean, to be able to read images has become a skill almost. But I think I'm not an expert on this, but if you don't have books with pictures when you're grown up, I think you will be fine. But I think with great illustration and the imagination of that, of course, you get maybe a greater, more creative mind, I would think. Mm-hmm. Or it stimulates your mind, maybe not more creative, but it stimulates your brain, I think.
Mm-hmm. So in the schools in Sweden, what kind of practices are applied to improve the knowledge of teachers in children's literature? Are there any special practices that you know of?
That for teachers?
Yes, for teachers to promote their knowledge and learn new techniques, maybe.
Yeah. there are various sources. I would say this ministry of telling, for example, Berättarministeriet. When I worked in Istanbul as kulturattaché, I invited them because I thought they work in an interesting way that could be useful for Turkey in many ways, and they work very much in poorer areas in Sweden with after-school activities where they very proactively and also with games. I mean, they come there with teachers and they get extra materials to work with writing and reading. I'm trying to think on top of my head. I mean, I'm sure there are lots of different things that are available. I mean, there's another place you can look for. I'm not sure if right now in my head if it's in English. There's through the Swedish State Council, they have started a great project also. I know it exists in other places in the world. Book gifting. It's not book gifting material. They give books to families who just had children, and on their website, I mean, it's been very, very popular. It's called Bookstart. I can share this with you. They give out books and a kit to parents, and also with that comes sort of a kit with education, how to read, what you can do, and activities of different kinds. And also in the schools, the schools can apply for special money from the government to invite authors and illustrators to actually, from their professional professions, teach and give classes and workshops. So there are lots of different additions for teachers available that are governmentally funded, I guess, in many ways.
In your speech, you mentioned about Ministry of Storytelling, right?
Yes.
Well, it's very interesting.
The Ministry
can you
of...
tell us what they do? What's their
They are the ones.
scope of work?
They are the ones that work, that I just mentioned. They work with schools. It's actually a program that was started by an author in San Francisco. Do I remember his name now? Şule Hanım, I have to write to you and tell you what they're called in English, because it's actually kind of a concept, and I think that concept would work really quite well. That I imagine so anyway, in Turkey, how they go in different schools and neighborhoods to work proactively. And it was started in San Francisco by this well-known author that I don't remember right now. And they have a few different names. In Sweden, it's called the Ministry of Telling. And I know they also exist in England. And they have, it's like a method, really, that to me seems really good. And in Sweden, they have expanded. And they work very closely with schools. They're not in the schools, but they work closely with schools. So the children go there after schools or with their teachers. But I have to think in my brain who that person is.
Well, I believe it's very inspiring to hear such stories. And I will forward you one last question. And how do you think the balance between the illustrations and the text should be in a child's book?
I don't know if there is, one recipe for this either. I don't know if you know one of the Alma laureates, Sean Tan, an illustrator. I mean, he has done a few books that are only silent books. It's only images.
Mm-hmm.
So as a reader, you talk, you enter into that world. I think, you know, that's a question for you as creatives, as the illustrator and as the writer. I love illustration myself. I mean, I think when you have magical illustrations that somehow, you know, take you on another journey, the text is maybe saying something and the picture is supporting that, but is also expanding that. It's like having two stories read to you, but that go together. Something like that. But I don't think there's a recipe of there should be so many pictures to that much text. I think it all depends on the writer or the illustrator, how they feel that what they want to tell is being told somehow.
Thank you. And let us take your final words before we close the session. Is there a special message that you would like to convey to our audience?
I would like you to really support children's culture in every kind of way. I know that you're already doing that because you are there. I also think you should work hard and make sure that we in the Astrid Lindgren Memorial Award get great nominations from Turkey. So hopefully, if the jury picks in the future a Turkish writer or a picture maker or a reading promotion organization, it would be wonderful. And then we would meet in that kind of situation.
Suzi Erşahin, thank you very much for being with us tonight, sparing your time. I'm sure our audience has benefited a lot from the opinions you have shared. And perhaps in the future organizations to come, we may be face-to-face in Izmir and have the pleasure to host you in person in Izmir. Thanks for joining again.
I thank you again. And I'm coming to Izmir soon, I hope, and then I will call you.
Do you have links in Izmir, is it?
Yes, I do. My cousins are there and yeah. Ben tekrar çok teşekkür etmek istiyorum. 2 yıldır Türkçe konuşmuyorum neredeyse. Unuttum gibi ama çok teşekkürler.
O zaman biz de veda edelim. Değerli konuklar, bu akşam bizimle birlikte olduğunuz için ve bu güzel söyleşiyi bizimle paylaştığınız için çok teşekkür ediyoruz.